Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I am Lord Christopher, recently knighted myself, so there it is. This was the book I was telling you about on the last part. Regarding the church. Now, I'm going to read what it says, but that's it. And I'm going to read the little caption underneath. It says, "The Old Ship Church, Hingham, Massachusetts." Did I say Massachusetts? I think I did. Samuel Lincoln, the fourth great-grandfather of the president, helped to build this church in which he and his family worshipped. Where was it? In 1921, a commemorative article on Samuel Lincoln described the Puritan lineage of Lincoln, the idealist, the liberator, the very spirit of that democracy which we celebrate this month on Lincoln Day. The article affirmed that it was historically proved and internationally ratified the greatest descendant of Puritan lineage is Abraham Lincoln. I don't know if that's a fact. Whatever. Installed 2 years earlier in St. Andrew's Church in Hingham, England, was a bust of Abraham Lincoln, which hailed the many generations of Lincolns who have lived in this parish, ancestors of Abraham Lincoln, greatest of that lineage. In 1937, Hingham, Massachusetts, celebrated the 300th anniversary of the arrival of Samuel Lincoln by installing a tablet in the town in his honor. That was what I was talking about in the first one. If you haven't seen the first video, you should go back and watch that one because you're 14 minutes and 40 seconds behind. Plus, I paused a couple times and just talked. So let's get on with this video. I apologize, but I just wanted to get that out. Video.
Between 1849 and 1854, Lincoln dedicated himself totally to the legal profession, touring the 8 judicial circuits for 6 months of every year. However, in 1854, Lincoln was awoken from his political slumber by a law passed by Congress that would ignite the nation and fan the flames of a divisive issue which had been stirring the tensions in the country for decades.
This is the, is this the Dred Scott decision? By the way, and I've talked about it before, Dred Scott has a great granddaughter, great, I don't know how many greats, right? But she has a granddaughter. I believe she's in Missouri. But she goes around and she talks about Dred Scott. I missed the chance to see her. Stop! I missed the chance to see her, and I've contacted her a couple times, and I'd like to attend an event that she does, but, you know, you need sponsorship and stuff like that. I can't just go to her house and say, all right, show me.
The Kansas-Nebraska Act, proposed by Lincoln's long-term political rival.
I was wrong, but Dred Scott decision was on my mind, so there you go.
The Illinois Democrat, Stephen Douglas, was proposed to allow settlers of any new United States territory
Sorry, Dred Scott I think was in 1857. Or 58. My fault.
Decide through popular vote whether or not slavery would be permitted in the state, a proposal which would repeal the Missouri Compromise of 1820 that was so treasured by the free states, and so the proposal was seen as a potential, substantial victory for the slave states. Upon hearing the details of the act, Lincoln announced to his fellow lawyers, quote, "I tell you, this nation cannot exist half slave and half free," a statement which reflected the guiding principle of Lincoln's future years, the life of the nation, and with every problem that came before him, Abraham never lost sight of this fundamental premise. Provoked back into political action, Lincoln campaigned fiercely against the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and Senator Douglas returned to Illinois to make a series of speeches defending the act to his severely divided home state. But Lincoln spoke in opposition, replying to Douglas's speeches with supreme oratory skill, honed by his years in the courts of law. And in these speeches, Lincoln did not just attack Douglas's law, but rather the whole institution of slavery itself, insisting that slavery was immoral, unjust, and contrary to the Declaration of Independence and the wishes of the American founders. Meanwhile, the debates that had erupted over the Kansas-Nebraska Act since 1854 ignited a reshaping of the American party system, as the Democratic Party became the party promoting the extension of slavery, and whilst the Whig Party was disappearing into political obscurity, its members from the northern states joined the anti-slavery Democrats to form the Republican Party. Lincoln took an active role in the formation of this new anti-slavery party, delivering a speech at the party's first Illinois convention on the 29th of May, 1856, where he so mesmerized his audience that no record of this speech exists, so absorbed were the reporters who were listening. That November, the Democrat James Buchanan was elected president. However, the new Republican Party secured an impressive result, gaining 1.3 million votes, much to the alarm of the slave states, who insisted that, should the Republican Party win a presidential election, the Union would be dissolved. The tensions over slavery and its existence in the United States were already high, but they began to reach a crescendo in 1857, with the stunning intervention of the Supreme Court in the now infamous case of Dred Scott versus Sanford.
There it is.
This case concerned a Missouri slave, Dred Scott, who'd been taken by his owner to the free states of Illinois and Minnesota, and then returned to the slave state of Missouri, where his master died, following which Scott sued for his freedom on the grounds that he had previously been a resident of the free states. The case reached the Supreme Court, where Chief Justice Roger Taney spoke for the majority in declaring that this case was void, because as a black man, Scott was not a citizen of the United States, and indeed the court went further, declaring that all congressional laws, excluding slavery from the Western Territories, were unconstitutional and void, effectively permitting the extension of slavery into the new American territories. But the northern states reacted furiously, and Lincoln spoke out against the decision, taking particular issue with Taney's claim that the Declaration of Independence did not include black Americans, in its assertion that all men are born equal. Lincoln, by now fully reinvested in politics, set his sights on the upcoming 1858 elections, where Illinois voters would elect members of the state legislature, who would in turn select the next senator, and on the 16th of June, 1858, the Illinois Republican Party nominated Lincoln to take on his great rival, the Democrat Stephen Douglas, who had defended the Dred Scott decision, and Lincoln's acceptance speech is one of the best known. "A house divided against itself cannot stand," he told his Republican colleagues. "The nation must be all slave or all free." To ensure he would gain an equal footing with his famous and popular opponent, Lincoln challenged Douglas to a series of public debates in 7 towns around the state, which Douglas reluctantly accepted, and today, the Lincoln-Douglas debate are amongst the most famous and significant political debates in American history. With these two master...
I think I've been to the locations of 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Maybe 4. 3 for sure. Maybe. I didn't go there and just stand where they stood and looked around like, oh yeah, this is where it happened. I just happened to be there.
Orators dueling one another in a contest that, though only for the Illinois Senate seat, reflected the political divisions that were tearing the entire nation apart. Indeed, the eyes of Republicans and Democrats across the country were fixed on this contest, and the debates attracted such large audiences that they had to be held outside, with audiences regularly in the tens of thousands, and during these verbal feuds, Douglas accused Lincoln and his party of being radical abolitionists, while Lincoln posed incredibly awkward questions for Douglas, forcing him to break with his party over the issue of whether settlers in new states could choose to exclude slavery, and Douglas's affirmation that they could went down well with the Illinois electorate and helped him to attain re-election, yet it estranged him from his party, preventing him from ever becoming president. Despite ultimately losing the Senate race, in November 1858, Lincoln's Republicans gained substantial votes in what was ordinarily a firmly Democratic state, and Abraham had forged a national reputation for his eloquent opposition to the expansion of slavery, yet Lincoln was stung by his defeat, and once again turned his focus back to his law practice, being desperately short of income. However, Lincoln had no intention of retiring from politics. Indeed, his eyes were set on the presidential election of 1860, where an increasingly popular Republican Party was without a leader to take them into the election. In late 1859 and early 1860, Lincoln made moves to expand his reputation in the eastern states, publishing a book of the Lincoln-Douglas debates, which immediately became a bestseller, and, furthermore, in February 1860, Lincoln was invited to speak to a Republican Union in New York, where he gave one of his finest addresses that captivated the crowd and gained acclaim from major New York newspapers. Following this, Lincoln then traveled to New England, speaking and gaining Republican allies far from his Illinois home. On the 16th,
I think it was that trip that pretty much solidified him getting the nomination, if not, I don't want to say guaranteeing that he'd be elected, but it made it difficult for anyone else to have a chance.
of May 1860, Republican delegates met in Chicago for the Republican National Convention and nominated Lincoln as their presidential nominee, narrowly edging Senator William Seward of New York, who would become Lincoln's Secretary of State. And although Seward was better known with more experience, Lincoln, it was believed, with his less radical views on slavery, was better placed to carry the swing states, where voters did not love slavery, but loathed abolitionism. Lincoln was firmly against the expansion of slavery into the Western territories, but at the same time, he was against abolishing the practice where it already existed. And meanwhile, at the Democratic Convention, held in Charleston, South Carolina, on the 23rd of April, there were severe divisions between Northern Democrats in favor of Senator Stephen Douglas, and Southern Democrats who were angered at Douglas's remarks during his 1858 Senate campaign, that people in the Western territories could vote to exclude slavery from the new states. The convention failed to come to a consensus, and so in a reconvened convention held in Baltimore, the Democratic Party split, with the Northern wing nominating Douglas, whilst the Southern wing nominated John Breckinridge of Kentucky on a fiercely pro-slavery platform. But, based on advice from Republicans, Lincoln ran a stay-at-home campaign, replying to the immense amount of letters he was receiving, and attempting to damage control false rumors about his record. With the Democratic Party split, it seemed that a Republican victory was likely, and indeed, on the night of the 6th of November, 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected as the 16th President of the United States, winning less than 40%
Be honest, I didn't think he'd get it.
of the popular vote, but 180 out of 303 Electoral College votes. The President-elect, though elated at his victory, read some worrying signs from the election results, namely that in 10 states, not a single ballot was cast in his favor, and it was in these southern states, whose politicians were fierce defenders of slavery, that threats of secession had emanated throughout the election campaign. Lincoln had assumed this to be simply electioneering rhetoric. However, even as he was planning to move to Washington, South Carolina was planning a move of its own, one that would
I want to quickly interrupt it and say that after Lincoln was in office, and I think the war was pretty much going then, Stephen Douglas showed up and was like, okay, and met with Lincoln at the White House and basically said, okay, we have to fix this. We are a union. We are one nation. We're not two. And Stephen Douglas spent the remaining time of his life, which wasn't very. He died in 1861, I believe. 61? Yeah, I think he died relatively early after the election. But he was all in on helping Lincoln. He was like, look, you won. You are the president, and it's my job to help the president and to help you solidify the country, bring it back all together. And I always think I don't think that Douglas gets enough praise for that. People always look at the other side of Douglas, the slavery expansion and blah 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 and all that stuff, but he got right in line, and I think that was something that meant a lot, especially to Lincoln, meant a lot, and it just showed that people you think are your enemies, you find out that you're both on the same team. You're on different sides. You're on the same team. You're just at different ends of the bench. How about that? And that's when he started seeing things like that. But I just wanted to bring that up because I thought it was something that Stephen Douglas should get a compliment for instead of, however people view him. It's a good thing.
Tear the United States apart, and so the process of secession began on the 10th of November when South Carolina authorized the election of a state convention to consider the future relations between the state and the Union.
The 10th of November, does that mean then that we in the U.S. get to say remember the 10th of November? Because the British get to say, was it remember the 5th of November for Guy Fawkes Day. So we have our own thing. How great is that?
Within a month, every state in the Deep South had followed suit. Lincoln believed the South to be bluffing about secession, as they had done during the Missouri Compromise and the Mexican War, in order to extract concessions from the North, and as such he failed to recognize the strength of secessionist sentiment in the cotton-growing states, who believed that their right to practice slavery was severely threatened by the new Republican Party. Those from South Carolina voted for an overwhelmingly secessionist state convention, which, on the 20th of December, 1860, declared that the state would withdraw from the Union, and as a wave of secessionist zeal swept through the South, by February 1861, South Carolina was joined by Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Texas, Georgia, and Louisiana, who met in Montgomery, Alabama, to draw up a constitution for the new Confederate States of America.
Montgomery, Alabama. Isn't that where you're from, Greg? Or no, maybe was it Montgomery, Alabama? Was that what it was? I don't remember now.
Which Mississippi Senator Jefferson Davis was.
I'm sorry, Greg, if you are from there and they did meet in Montgomery, do they have a thing like a building where this is where they met? The Constitutional Convention. Did I say that right? Anyways, do they have a place in Montgomery where if you're there, I have no idea. You're the only Alabama person I know right now, so this is on you. This is your responsibility not to find this out. I could Google it, but just curious.
Made president. Though secession occurred rapidly, it was by no means a reactionary response to the presidential election, and the South's attachment to slavery had caused a growing estrangement from the North, decades in the making, as the Southern.
Are tobacco leaves typically that big, or is it just an optical illusion and they're not that big? That looked like they were. I apologize, I don't know. But that looked like it was a big ass leaf.
Economy remained agricultural and its society rural and hierarchical, whilst the North industrialized and expanded its urban population. When this growing detachment reached its climax at the result of the 1860 election, an idea that had been discussed and debated for decades among Southern politicians was finally put into action, and the speed with which the Deep South seceded from the Union and the immense support secession had in these states is a testament to the primacy of state loyalties over national loyalties at this time. When Abraham Lincoln rose to deliver his inaugural address on the 4th of March, 1861, the young American nation was in the midst of the worst crisis it had ever known, and the president appealed to the nation's better nature, stating, "We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of the Union, when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature," his words urging reconciliation rather than conflict. No.
So basically, the states had already split by the time he did his inaugural address. They were already apart.
No president has assumed office facing the difficulties that Lincoln did in March 1861, unexperienced and unpopular, facing an unprecedented crisis which daunted even the most experienced of men in Lincoln's cabinet, including his Secretary of State William Seward. Lincoln entered the White House clinging to one belief above all others, that the Union must be preserved at all costs. The most pressing matter for the president was that of Fort Sumter, where a Union army under Major Robert Anderson had garrisoned the fort, located in the middle of Charleston Harbor and surrounded on three sides by Confederate batteries. Lincoln did not want to withdraw the army to maintain Union prestige. However, he could not send reinforcements into the hostile harbor either, and when, on the 12th of April 1861, the Confederate batteries began a bombardment of Fort Sumter, after 34 hours, Anderson's garrison was forced to surrender, and so the American Civil War had begun. The fall of Sumter revived the Lincoln administration and the northern states, galvanizing them under a clear objective, which was to preserve the Union by putting down the Southern Rebellion. And on the 15th of April, President Lincoln called for the states to supply a militia of 75,000 men, and this was received with a wave of approval across the North, as nationalist feeling caused a surge of support for war with the Confederacy. However, this call for troops disgruntled the states of the Upper South, consisting of North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, and Arkansas, who finally decided to secede from the Union on the 17th of April, with the Confederacy then moving its capital to Richmond, Virginia, and the following day, Lincoln offered the command of the Union armies to the Virginian Colonel, Robert E. Lee, who declined, stating that he would not draw his sword against his native state. Growing in confidence in his position, Lincoln now took further steps to prepare the Union for war, proclaiming a blockade of Confederate ports on the 19th of April and expanding the Union armies and navies, and in his 4th of July address to Congress, Lincoln set out his view of the conflict, seeing it not as a war between two states, as this would imply recognizing the Confederacy, but as a rebellion, an insurrection of individuals in the southern states, who had betrayed the Union they were fighting to preserve.
Beautiful. I'm going to end this here. I got to put that book back on the shelf. I'm going to end this here, and we will do part 3. I'm going to do part 3, but I'm going to do it a little bit later. 7:15 New Year's Eve, 7:15 p.m. New Year's Eve, and this is what I'm doing because I got nothing to do right now. I'm bored. I have a thing on the TV right now, and I thoroughly love it, and it's it's talking about modern women and how they hit a wall when they reach a certain age and men don't want to date them or they have kids and stuff like that. And it's just hilarious to me how these women, they love this double standard. I'm enjoying it. It's been great. That doesn't have anything to do with this, so I'm going to go ahead and end it here. Like and subscribe, or next time you're in the shower, a great white shark is going to attack you.